all of these different fights, all of these different subpoenas, all of these different confrontations, they are the same thing. It is Trump versus Mueller's investigation. And the apex concern that the president and the Trump White House and his helpers in this fight must have, the prospect that they must feel lurking under the bed, ready to reach out and grab their ankles if they let a foot touch the floor, right? The gravest boogeyman worry they've got to have right now has to be that Robert Mueller somehow, some way, will be allowed to speak freely and for himself about his own investigation and his own findings in his own terms. Because this feels like we are going through this remarkable period in the news, right? It has been a 6-week festival of freakout, trying to stop Mueller from speaking in his own terms about his own work. And we will talk with Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler, who's going to be joining us live in just a moment. We will talk with him about that. We're going to be talking later on this hour with a legal expert who may be able to give us, I think, the clearest possible view into how they can try to stop Mueller from testifying forever. But given that all of these little fights are really all the same confrontation, there's one other thing that has happened tonight that hasn't gotten a lot of pickup yet in the news, at least. But you should know about it, I think, before we move on to that question about Mueller himself. And it's this document, actually, from the Judiciary Committee in the Senate. And you see there's a bunch of signatures there in blue. All the Democrats on the Judiciary Committee in the Senate signed on to this document. It's structured in the form of a letter to the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, who's Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. And in form, what the point is of this letter is that the Democrats on this committee would like Robert Mueller to please come testify to their committee because they have some questions for Mueller about his investigation. But what is sort of amazing about what they have done here tonight is that in making the case to Lindsey Graham about why they think it might be important to have Mueller himself come sit down and answer some questions, they have overtly laid out in detail some of the questions they'd like Mueller to answer if they ever did get the chance to talk to him. And as such, in this letter, which I'm not sure many people have noticed tonight, the Senate Judiciary Committee, the Democrats on the committee, have kind of stepped up and provided what appears to me to be the first public roadmap for what Congress might want to look into, for what Congress actually might want to figure out now that Robert Mueller's investigation, by whatever means, has been brought to an end. And there's 60 questions here. I mean, conservatively speaking, a lot of them are compound questions, so I'd say it's more than that. But just as a sample, right? To what degree was the investigation able to determine why Paul Manafort volunteered to work for the Trump campaign for free, and whether he discussed the possibility of joining the Trump campaign team with foreign nationals? To what degree was your investigation able to determine whether members of the campaign other than Rick Gates were aware that internal campaign strategy and polling data was being shared with Russian national Konstantin Kilimnik? Good question. To what degree was your investigation able to determine whether internal Clinton campaign data analytics and voter turnout models that were stolen as part of the Russian hacking operation were used by Russia or shared with anyone working for or with the Trump campaign? To what degree did your investigation examine the role of Cambridge Analytica, Aggregate IQ, or the SCL Group in the 2016 election? Did your investigation examine the possibility that U.S. election or Trump campaign information was shared with Russia through these entities? To what degree was your investigation able to determine the Trump campaign's and the Russian government's purpose in pursuing back-channel communications, including between Jared Kushner and the Russian ambassador Sergei Kislyak, which Kushner suggested should be arranged using secure facilities at the Russian embassy? Also, between Sergei Gorkov, between Kushner and Sergei Gorkov, the head of a Russian government-owned bank. Also between Rick Gerson, a friend of Kushner, and Kirill Dmitriev, the head of Russia's sovereign wealth fund, who reports directly to Vladimir Putin. Also, what about that back channel between Eric Prince, a trusted associate of the Trump transition team, and the same Kirill Dmitriev, who reports directly to Putin? To what degree was your investigation able to determine the content of these back-channel communications between Trump campaign and Russian government representatives? I mean, it goes on and on, on and on and on. I mean, here, just finally, just this one would be really good to know. Just this one. To what degree was your investigation, Mr. Mueller, able to determine whether the Trump Tower Moscow project was part of an effort to gain influence over Donald Trump? Did you look at that? I mean, that's just some of it. That doesn't even get to, fully half of their questions are about the obstruction stuff, including multiple questions about whether efforts to obstruct the investigation materially affected Mueller's ability to get to the bottom of things. Right? When witnesses didn't cooperate with the investigation after they were encouraged not to cooperate with the investigation by President Donald Trump, did it affect Mueller's ability to figure out what was going on? Meaning, did the obstruction work, Mr. Mueller, to block you from figuring out the important stuff you were trying to figure out? That'd be good to know, right? We have had 6 weeks now of escalating and I think now increasingly frantic efforts by the president, the White House, the newly appointed attorney general, in some cases Republicans in Congress, trying to basically screw the lid down onto Robert Mueller's head, to keep that jar sealed up, to make sure that none of these questions get pursued by anybody who might be able to figure them out, and certainly none of them get asked of a man who might be able to explain both what he found and what he did and didn't look for and why. House Democrats are going to start reading Mueller's report into the congressional record live on the House floor tomorrow night. Elizabeth Warren started that yesterday on the floor of the Senate. But I would just say, in the middle of what has been already a truly remarkable week in the news, don't get overwhelmed by what feels like 1,000 different process fights, all seemingly breaking out all at once or in quick succession, all over different parts of Washington, involving different characters, different sources of authority, different areas of the law. It feels like 1,000,000 different fights. It's one fight. This is the fight to try to make the Mueller investigation go poof. And the most intriguing part of this fight today is how hard the Democrats are now fighting on the other side to stop that from happening. And Chairman Jerry Nadler joins us next live.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.